Good evening, everybody. Today we will talk about the current situation between Ukraine and Russia and India's role in it. I have been posting about these things on Twitter, but then with the limitations and the size of the posts, it's not really possible to do justice to a subject like this. To summarize the issue, actually one has to really get into great details if one has to do full justice to it. But let's do it briefly. Ukraine was a part of the United Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR, for many decades, till it fell apart, and then, like certain other non Russian nationalities or sub-nationalities, Ukraine too broke away about 30 years back. Um when Ukraine broke away from Russia, there was a clear understanding of mutual cooperation. Ukraine surrendered their nuclear weapons to USSR, to Russia. In fact, at that time there was no more USSR, and the United States, with an understanding there will be guaranteeing Ukraine's sovereignty and freedom. But to understand the nature of the state of Ukraine, one has to go back to the India story again. India's partition and the independence of India as per the Indian Independence Act and whatever happened after that. So the Indian subcontinent, the undivided India was one country, and then because of political reasons, this is not the time and place to go into those. There was a partition, but then culturally we were similar. There were a lot of heartbreaks. There were a lot of people who were caught up in this partition on the wrong side of the border. Bengalis have relatives in the east, in East Bengal or East Pakistan. Punjabis had to come away wholesale from West Punjab, but then their ties remained. Sindhis came away wholesale from Sindh. So a lot of trauma. Luckily, between Russia and Ukraine, it wasn't that traumatic, but then the issues lingered. There are Ukrainians in Russia, Russians in Ukraine. There are a lot of Ukrainians who cherish the old ties with Russia. The Soviet regime maybe sans the Stalinist part of it. So it's not that simple. It's not like division between Germany and Russia, or even Russia and Romania. So to understand Ukrainian politics, we have to keep that in mind. A lot of Ukrainians wanted to be a part of Russia. They were sympathetic to Russia. There were a succession of Ukrainian leaders who were pro-Russia or close to Russia or moderate. They were overthrown by the hardcore nationalists of Ukraine. Now, Ukraine has a history of far-right nationalism. During World War II, a lot of Ukrainians, they supported the Nazi cause, the Germans. They participated in the genocide against Jews. Jews were rounded up and they were massacred en masse at the notorious Babi Yar site, by Einsatzgruppen, German special killer forces, of the SS. And Ukrainians, anti-Semitic Ukrainians, they helped, collaborated in the process. They collaborated as guards in the German death camps, in Nazi concentration camps. So a lot of Ukrainians had blood on their hands, just like a lot of Polish people did. They were as much against the Jews in parts of Poland as the Nazis were, and there too, like Ukraine, they cooperated with the Nazis in the genocide against Jews. Now, again, that's not the main issue, but we have to understand this today when we interpret what's happening on the ground. So the other part is, NATO trying to push Russia. Yeltsin was a complete agent of America. He just wanted to fatten his own purse linings, and he sold out Russia. If that's one cliched phrase, he sold out Russia to Western, particularly American business interests. And Russia was historically at its lowest ebb under Yeltsin. Then Putin came, took over, and now I feel, looking back over 2 decades, that he did it very well. He didn't raise hackles initially. He allowed himself time and Russia time to gather strength. He gradually drove out, certain vested interests, Western business interests from Russia, and he, that way courted deadly angst of the West, particularly of American business interests, by chasing them out. He built up the Russian armed forces, rebuilt the Russian armed forces. Before that, after the breakdown of the Soviet Union, fall of the Soviet Union, Russia only had some nukes. That's it. I mean, no big deal. The Navy, their Air Force, their ground forces, otherwise were run down. But then Putin has built them up, and in the last 5 or 6 years, he has built delivery systems, of weapons of mass destruction, which cannot be countered by the West. There's the Poseidon oceanic multi-purpose system, is delivered by submarines carrying non-nuclear, conventional or nuclear overheads, and they can create tsunamis, virtual tsunamis, which can denude any coastline. Coastal cities will be washed away through giant tsunamis. So US and Western Europe with the coastline, they can threaten and destroy, and those cannot be stopped. They have avant-garde, glide vehicles through which they can deliver ICBM warheads, nuclear warheads, let's say, and they are delivered in such a way, they move in such a way that they cannot be traced or stopped. We all know about Zircon, ship to ship or submarine to ship missiles for conventional naval battles. Russia today can bring NATO to a standstill if it's a lose-lose game, zero-sum game. Putin has said that if you want to destroy Russia, then Russia will go the mile. And Putin took a call that NATO cannot be allowed to come further east. They have surrounded Russia from all sides now, even though they had promised when the Berlin Wall fell that NATO will not move east of Germany. But they have. And Russia was very weak, and they couldn't do much about it. So we stood by, and a lot of worthies who are now sobbing buckets, where were they when America committed major war crimes in Middle East against Iran, against Libya. They tried to do it in Syria, but by then Putin had become strong and he went in. America has never had a war without committing war crimes for the last 200 years. The Indian wars, in those days they were called Red Indian Wars. They were full of war crimes. They didn't treat them as human beings. They broke treaties. They went into a campaign of annihilation of the native Indians, Native Americans in North America. After that, they broke Mexican sovereignty to chase people they didn't like. That was just before the First World War, their participation in First World War. Pancho Villa, and there were characters who fell out with America, and Americans sent an army and expeditionary force into sovereign Mexico to chase him, to find one man. They couldn't find him. These kind of behavior in others, America calls them, actions against humanity and war crimes and whatnot. Nazi German leaders, not military leaders, even the foreign minister von Ribbentrop, he was hanged to death because he waged illegal wars. He broke treaties. He helped Germany wage illegal wars. That was the logic. And German top military commanders who didn't kill anyone with their own hands, like Field Marshal Keitel or General Oberst Donatz, head of operations, they were hanged because they had endorsed Hitler's wars of annihilation, and they forwarded Hitler's orders, which involved war crimes in the East particularly. But America, no one, the worthies today, the liberal worthies, you see, they were spewing and ranting on Indian TVs, talking of morality and whatnot. Never could do anything to stop any of them, where they expect India today to stop Putin. I mean, there's really you cannot really have a polite response to that. And it's not about history. We're not talking about Vietnam, where America every day committed war crimes. Agent Orange is a terrible chemical weapon which devastated crops, and because of which, pregnant women, children who were born later, they contracted cancer. A lot of adults, who were in the war zone, and children, they contracted cancer. They used napalm against civilians, and napalm is a dirty bomb. I mean, it's a burning jelly is spread all around, and it clings to your skin, and your skin gets burnt off your bones. These are the kind of weapons America has used often against civilians. And today they are talking of war crimes, and we're not talking of ancient history. What George Bush Jr. did in Iraq has seldom been done in the civilized world. And German leaders had been hanged for far less. Yeah, for less. People like Ribbentrop had been hanged for less. What George Bush Jr. did in Iraq, completely illegal war with trumped up charges, and what Tony Blair did of England. And what happened to them? Nothing. Nothing ever happens to them, to the Westerners. In Vietnam War, there was a village called My Lai, which was devastated and everyone killed. There was a mass murder by American troops. And for the war crime, there was a showpiece trial. One junior personnel, he was sentenced to containment at home, not even proper jail. And President Reagan even he forgave that, and that home prison also was not there for him. That charges were dropped. The charges were dropped by Reagan. So let no one tell you that America or England or the Western Europe they are in a position to lecture anyone on war crimes and illegal wars and stuff like that. Where does India's interest lie? Russia has never ever harmed India. Never ever. Let me repeat. When America sent its 7th Fleet to scare us, and there were Royal Navy ships in Indian Ocean from two sides. Russia chased them away, the Royal Navy ships first. And by the time Russian ships arrived here, India knew they were underway. And our pilots on Vikrant, our aircraft carrier, our brave boys, in the mess room, they used to say, dive maar denge. No one gave a damn for the 7th Fleet because we had Russia with us. Russia scared China into not distracting us during the 71 war, because Russia mobilized on the China's Xinjiang frontier. When these so-called democracies, they were supporting Pakistani genocide in East Pakistan, the mass murders, the mass rapes, the war of extermination, the hate crimes, what have you, what Pakistan was doing in the East, America supported that. They talked of sovereignty of East Pakistan, and when India, to defend India's interests and to save the Bengalis in the East, India entered Pakistan in December, from late November actually 1701, and in December war started full-fledged. The same democracies, so-called democracies of the West, they tried to bring resolution after resolution in the United States condemning India. In the same language today, they are condemning Russia. Same language, talking of sovereignty. Come on. Iraqi sovereignty, Libyan sovereignty, Syrian sovereignty, nothing ever mattered. Okay. Even now, American lackey Saudi Arabia, they're bombing Yemen back to the Stone Ages. Israel is pounding the Golan Heights in Syria. I mean, let no Indian brother or sister fall for this nonsense, which is being spread by Western agent provocators in India, parts of Indian media, certain Indian analysts who are trying to fool you that the Western world has a moral stance and Putin is evil. No. NATO had to be stopped. And Putin is the only hope to stop NATO. China and America had a very cozy relationship. They're both Baniyas, and they wanted to split the world between them. And India had moved away from Russia over the years, after the fall of USSR. But Russia maintained the relationship and from a distance. And today, if anyone is saying that Russia didn't stop China, obviously Russia didn't stop China. We were into Quad. We were an ally of US. Okay. And our relationship with Russia was only about procuring arms for the last, many years now. But Russia stayed with us. never directly went against Indian interests, but Russia has their own interests. It's completely in India's national interest, and it is morally correct to side with Russia today. And those who are saying, on one hand, they are saying Russia should give safe passage to our kids in Ukraine while they're getting beaten up in these railway stations, they're being threatened with guns, okay, by goons in the stations of Kharkiv. Our girls have been roughed up in the border, their hair has been pulled, okay, boys have been beaten up with rods. Has Russia ever done that? Russia is willing to give us safe passage, and some traitors in India, they're saying while that's happening, they're urging the Indian government to take a stand against Russia in the United Nations Security Council. While this is happening, while Indian students are being given safe passage from Kharkiv to the Russian border and beyond. And can you beat this? Can you imagine this? This is not about morality, this is about plain stupidity, and this is anti-national. I don't want to get into the rhetoric, but then I really don't have a better vocabulary. What are they trying to do? I'll request every Indian sister and brother to analyze it on their own, to keep their eyes and ears open, not fall for NATO's propaganda being completely repeated in mainstream Indian channels. We owe it to India. We owe it to our history. We owe it to our future. Thank you. Good night.